What's good, y'all? It is Wednesday, and you know what that means at Barely Qualified Picks? We are back at you with another week of our college football picks and our updated playoff projections. You know, it's hard to believe that we've already been at this for 4 weeks, but we have. And through 4 weeks, we are in the black. We're 11-9, and you know, honestly, if we didn't have that 1-4 week in week 5, we'd be moving from solid territory to great territory. A 4-1 or a 5-0 week can be the boost that we need to enable that level up this week, and I think the slate this week looks enticing. Now, before we jump into this week's picks, there is more to come on Next Coach Fired. As I mentioned in our Monday morning quarterback post earlier this week, it's been a tough week already. Bloody Sunday saw the loss of head coaches Trent Dilfer, Trent Bray at Oregon State, and of course, James Franklin at Penn State. And as I mentioned in the blog post today, it sort of feels like the movie The Long Walk. If you've read the book or you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, The Long Walk is a movie that's set in a dystopian future, sort of like the Hunger Games meets Squid Games. You have 50 young men from every state who have all applied through a lottery to win a spot in the Long Walk. And it's pretty simple. You walk to win. If you fall below 3 miles per hour, you get a warning. After a couple of warnings, you are executed. It is pretty gruesome. There's a reason why the movie is rated R and why the book was written by Stephen King. Very permanent consequences. And it seems like this year, more than any other year, we've seen a bunch of people go down in the Long Walk very early in the season, 8 mid-season firings, and now it sounds like Billy Napier of Florida is next up. For all the names that I had on my list when I posted the blog today, I forgot Billy Napier. And it sounds like the administration has already been talking with the top boosters this week. They're putting together a package to get him out of there. So Billy Napier seems like he may be the next contestant out in the Long Walk. That said, there are a bunch of guys who are at risk on very hot seats, from Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. Who you got to think about the over-under of Wisconsin's win total. If it's 2.5, they're long odds on the over there. They could very well end up a 2-10 team, and there's not a lot of jumping around to be done in Camp Randall this year. Mike Norvell, we're going to talk about him in a little bit and others receiving votes. This might be a Mike Norvell save your job game against Stanford. He's got a $58.6 million buyout. Luke Fickell's just $27.5 million in comparison. But you got to think that those Seminole boosters are looking for every dollar that they can put together to get Mike Norvell out of there if he doesn't show up against Stanford. And even if he does, he may not make it to the end of the season. Dabo Swinney, $60 million buyout. When you look at Clemson, they've still got to play SMU. They've got to go to Duke. They've got to play FSU, and they've got to go to Louisville. If they don't fare well in that slate, if they go 1-3 or, God forbid, worse, does Dabo Swinney make it to the end of the year? Rich Rodriguez is in his first season of his second rodeo in Morgantown. If you remember years ago, he left West Virginia after an almost national championship season that Pitt ruined in the backyard brawl. And he ended up jumping over to Michigan, which didn't work out. Rich Rodriguez is back at West Virginia, but things are not going well. The Mountaineers are 2-4, and they're getting their butts kicked on a weekly basis. They're on a 3-game losing streak, and they'll almost certainly be a touchdown or larger dog in every game remaining on their schedule. With all of that, if they don't fare well against that slate, is Rich Rod sitting at 2-8 or 2-9 on the hot seat and at risk of being gone before the season's over? Mark Stoops, looking at you, brother. 3 years in a row that Kentucky has underperformed since their 10-win season 4 years ago. Eventually, the boosters, even at a basketball school like Kentucky, are going to tire of these losing seasons. They've lost 8 straight SEC games. And the remaining schedule is brutal for Kentucky. They play Texas at home. They play Tennessee at home. They go to Auburn. They have Florida at home. They go to Vanderbilt and to Louisville in a rivalry game. Maybe Kentucky lets the season play out before they fire Stoops, but I think the more likely result is that Stoops doesn't make it to the end of the year, especially with how many candidates are going to be available. Schools are not only going to want to fire coaches, they're going to want to start snapping them up. Hugh Freeze at Auburn. Do you guys remember when Cam Newton led Auburn to one of the most epic seasons in college football history? Or when they last beat rival Alabama in 2019 before the pandemic? Neither do I, and that's a problem. Auburn, is not expected to contend for the national championship every single year, but they are expected to be a contender more years than not. Freeze simply has not done well in his 3+ seasons at Auburn. He's 14-17. He's 5-14 in the SEC. He also hasn't beaten Bama. So if Auburn is 5-6 heading into their matchup with Alabama at the end of the year, does Freeze find himself in a de facto loser leaves town match? And then we've got Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. He and the Spartans are on their own 3-game losing streak, and they would be fortunate to get 2 more wins out of their final 6 games. After a disappointing 5-7 campaign in his first year in East Lansing, could falling to 3-7 or 3-8 this season be enough for the Spartan administration to cut the cord? It might be. And just in case, Oregon State better start calling Reeser to set up a lifetime macaroni salad clause in hopes that Smith will choose them amid what will surely be a number of other suitors once this hiring period truly begins. And then finally, Bill Belichick. Do any of us believe that Bill Belichick and his staff are going to make it to the end of the year? They've only got a $20.8 million buyout. That's a lot less than the $33 million of Jonathan Smith. That's less than the $37 million of Mark Stoops. It's very, very conceivable that Bill Belichick has a one-and-done season at North Carolina, and maybe it's even a partially one-and-done season at North Carolina. I'll say it again, I can't quite remember a year like this in college football. Maybe it's an anomaly. Maybe it's a sign of the times. Either way, there are a lot of coaches who need to be keeping a watchful eye over their shoulder over these next few weeks. All right, now let's get to our top 5 picks. We're looking forward to building on the momentum that we have generated over these last 2 weeks. We were 3-2 each of the last 2 weeks, 6-4 overall, and that could have been even a bit better if we got a couple of breaks that would just have gone our way. Looking at you, Vanderbilt. After breaking down a handful of interesting matchups, our top 5 this week gives us a great shot at going 5-0. And it starts with Nebraska going into the Twin Cities to play Minnesota. 5-1 Nebraska, 4-2 Minnesota. This line opened at Nebraska -7.5. It quickly moved to 8.5. And this being our first pick of the week might surprise some of you who know us at Barely Qualified Picks. Up until this season, we've been on an auto fade for Nebraska's season win total every year for the past 5 or so years. But here we are with the Cornhuskers in the top 25 for the first time in 6 years, and they seem like a real top 25 team under Matt Rule. Rule, for what it's worth, has been the first and biggest name in the Penn State rumor mill since Franklin's exit on Sunday. Will that noise impact the Cornhuskers' focus? That's a great question. Now, when we look at the tape and we look at the numbers, the Nebraska offense is in really good shape against a Minnesota defense that's had some moments, but it's pretty middling. The Cornhuskers seem real themselves. They've had wins over Cincy, Michigan State, and last week at Maryland. The Michigan State and Maryland wins are decent, but they might lose some value as the season continues, whereas the Cincy win in the season opener seems to keep getting prettier. Quarterback Dylan Raiola and the Nebraska offense have averaged 36 points per game in winning their last 2 games, despite turning the ball over a total of 4 times. So if they can clean that up, the offense should be able to go to another level. They are not running the ball well, 139 yards per game. That's good for 11th in the Big Ten and 91st nationally. But the strength is really the passing offense, averaging 310 yards per game. That's 2nd in the Big Ten. That's 9th nationally. And they're doing a good job on 3rd down, 7th in the Big Ten and 28th nationally at 47%. Now, Dylan Raiola, again, is the engine of this offense. He's 4th nationally in completion rate at 73.4%. He's 22nd in the country in passing yards with nearly 1,600 yards on the season, and he's tied for 5th with 16 passing touchdowns. He's supported by a bell cow running back in Emmett Johnson, who had 176 yards last week to get him to 650 total yards on the season with 7 touchdowns. He being Dylan Raiola, has a wide receiver by committee with 4 different guys having grabbed 20 receptions or more already on the season. And defensively, Minnesota has performed okay by the numbers, particularly through the air where they do have 6 interceptions. Raiola better watch out, even though some of that has been a product of the competition that they played to date. They're 11th in the Big Ten in scoring defense, allowing 21 points per game, 50th nationally, so not bad. Their passing defense, as I said, allowing 200 yards per game. So which side is going to break? Nebraska averaging 310, Minnesota giving up 200. I would tend to lean towards Nebraska in this situation, even on the road. But if Minnesota can get a couple of turnovers and they can force Nebraska to try and shorten the field and change up their game plan, maybe they can win this matchup. Defensive back John Nestor has 5 passes defensed and 3 interceptions for the Gophers in the secondary. Will Raiola look away from him and try and get his elsewhere? Or will the Huskers just play their game and not game plan for somebody like Nestor specifically? Now, when you flip the field and Minnesota's on offense, the 4-2 Gophers may only be a game off of the Huskers in the standings, but there's a reason why Minnesota is almost catching double digits in this game. They have conference wins over 3-3 Rutgers and 2-4 Purdue. That's fine. Credit to the Gophers for a 14-0 fourth quarter blitz that got them to a win over Purdue 27-20 last week. But this is also a team that got absolutely stomped out by Ohio State 42-3 and got beat by what looks to be at this point a very up and down Cal team. Simply put, we've seen no quality performance wins from the Gophers this season. And the Gopher offense relies on a freshman quarterback, Drake Lindsey. One, it's hard to trust a true freshman at quarterback against good teams and great coaches like we have this week against Nebraska. 2, you should never trust a person with 2 first names, period. Strike 1 and 2 on you, Drake. Now, Lindsey is supported by a very bloated running back by committee. It's hard to tell who the guys are there that are going to help move the rock. And the receiving core is also by committee, where no receiver has eclipsed 300 yards, not even gotten to 300 yards or 4 touchdowns. The offense overall is statistically underwhelming. The scoring offense, 27 points per game, 14th in the Big Ten, 77th nationally. They can't run the ball very well, as I mentioned, 112 yards per game. That's 115th nationally. They throw the ball okay, 70th nationally, but again, that's nothing to write home about. And they don't convert well on third down, just 39%, which is 15th in the Big Ten and 82nd nationally. Now, Nebraska's defense has got to contend with this middling offense, and they've been serviceable, even if they haven't been spectacular in support of the offense this season. They've done enough the last 2 weeks to help the offense get the win, but they did give up 29 points per game along the way. That's gotten them to 18.7 points per game allowed on the season. That's 30th nationally, even though it's middle of the pack for the Big Ten, 8th. Their passing defense has been where they've made their bones. Their secondary is stingy as hell. First in the Big Ten, first nationally at 118 yards per game. So if Minnesota can't get the ball moving on the ground, which they have really struggled to do, their prospects through the air are not great. And Nebraska does have a +3 turnover margin, which is also 40th nationally. They only have 2 takeaways in their last 3 games, which may signal regression in a positive way for the Cornhuskers, given the state of their pass defense. And they are stingy on third down. They're 3rd in the Big Ten and 8th nationally, only allowing a 26.5% conversion rate. So the Gophers are up against it. I think the Cornhuskers are going to storm into Minneapolis looking to sling the ball. Defensively, they're going to want to shut down the pass and see if Minnesota can do anything on the ground. Key questions in this game. Can Nebraska's passing attack stay on schedule? I think so. Edge Nebraska. If so, can Minnesota's passing attack keep up? I don't think so. Not against this Nebraska passing D. Edge Nebraska. Will Nebraska be distracted by Penn State rumors over Matt Rule? Maybe. Edge Minnesota. Can Nebraska embrace one of the most important messages of the Mighty Ducks? It's not worth winning if you can't win big. They need to win big. Edge Nebraska. Matt Rule knows this. I think Nebraska wins by double digits, 31-20, and covers the 8.5. Now, in our second pick of the week, we're backing Vanderbilt again. That was a bad beat a couple of weeks ago, but we are behind Vanderbilt this week at -2.5 at home against LSU. This matchup of 2 5-1 teams that are eager to stay in the thick of the SEC and the playoff race comes with multiple intriguing storylines. Vanderbilt is a perfect 3-0 at home this year, though to their credit, they've loaded up on cake in Nashville and they played all their tougher competition on the road at Bama, at then number 11 South Carolina, and at Virginia Tech. Usually teams want to get their toughest tests in their home stadium to give them a competitive edge, but this actually seems to bode well for Vandy and for all of their statistical trends and rankings. Vandy also owes LSU a little bit of payback for their 24-17 loss in Death Valley last season. Now, LSU, for their part, has also won all of their home games, but unfortunately for all those corn dog-scented Tiger fans, the game isn't being played in Death Valley this year. Instead, LSU hits the road where they're 1-1 this year. They have a 17-10 season opening win at Clemson, which looked great at the time, then pretty terrible, and is now looking maybe just a bit better again, and a loss at then number 13 Ole Miss, 24-19. So LSU, good team, but they got to show us something this week. They've got to go into Vanderbilt and beat a Vanderbilt team. There's a reason why they're not favored despite all the talent that they have on the field. Now, when we look at the Vandy offense against the LSU defense, traditionally, LSU is a defense-first team. Maybe not necessarily this year. At first blush, this is an intriguing matchup of strengths, though, even if this isn't the same type of LSU defense that we've seen in years past. Vandy's rush offense is ranked 23rd in the country. LSU's rush defense is ranked 21st, 23 versus 21. Vandy's pass offense is ranked 46th in the country, a very respectable 46th, and LSU's pass D is ranked 42nd. Vandy is first nationally, converting 57.9% of their third downs, and LSU is 28th nationally, allowing just 31.7% conversions on third down. So, push meets shove, who's going to give? And then finally, LSU is allowing just 11.8 points per game. Vandy's scoring 43.2. I'm going to guess that we're going to meet somewhere in the middle. And as we said going into the Alabama game, as superstar quarterback Diego Pavia goes, so goes the Vandy offense. Pavia didn't quite have his A game in Tuscaloosa, and the final score reflected that. But Pavia is an elite college quarterback, and after a bye week to get healthy and prep for LSU, I expect Pavia to be back on his game this weekend. He's completing 71% of his passes. He's got 14 touchdowns and just 4 interceptions. He's also Vandy's leading rusher with 352 yards on 5.9 yards per carry. He's got 2 scores on the ground. He's going to need starting running back Cedric Alexander to show up. He's averaging 6.4 yards per carry. He needs to matter in this game. He also has 3 receivers of his own with 20-plus catches, each of whom has a long reception that exceeds 40 yards on the season. So big plays all over the field. Equitable distribution and pushing the ball outside the numbers is going to be key if Vandy is going to stretch out the LSU defense and win this game. Now, on offense, Vandy, as I said, has been impressive. They're second in the SEC and 7th nationally scoring. They're 4th in the SEC and 23rd nationally in rushing. They're 7th in the SEC and 46th nationally in passing. So a very strong offense all the way around. The one area where maybe they're not as strong is in the red zone. They're converting at a 90% rate. They're 10th in the SEC and just 42nd nationally. So they've got to make sure that when they get to the red zone, they get touchdowns. LSU's defense, on the other hand, is 6th in the SEC and 39th nationally in holding opponents to an 80% conversion rate. They're also 6th in the SEC and 28th nationally on third down. So we're going to see how these two really critical moments in the game that are going to pop up time and time again play out. LSU's offense, on the other hand, is very talented, but as yet suboptimally productive. They're running up against a Vandy D that is above average in the SEC and faring better than maybe most years for Vandy in the national rankings. Nowhere is that going to be more apparent than in the running game, where LSU is last in the SEC and just 113th nationally. Meanwhile, Vandy's 5th in the SEC and 16th nationally against the run, even after Jam Miller's productive and impressive outing for Bama 2 weeks ago. If LSU can't establish a consistent ground attack in this game and is forced into a more or less one-dimensional passing-first offense, that should help Vandy optimize their scheme. And that should help in the red zone. That should help on third down. That should help Vandy get the LSU offense off the field and give the ball back to their own offense. LSU, of course, has a great quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier. He has 1,400 yards, 9 touchdowns, 5 interceptions on the year. And their running back by committee approach, again, has not been great. It's led by 5'9" sophomore bowling ball Caden Durham. He's going to have to get going in this game if LSU is going to win. And also, 6'5" senior tight end Bauer Sharp is going to have to get going across the middle to open up outside the numbers for Aaron Anderson and Berrien Brown, each of whom have over 20 catches, over 250 yards, and Berrien Brown has 1 touchdown on the year. All of that said, LSU has not exactly been efficient. We have not seen them run the ball well. They've passed the ball okay, 9th in the SEC, 47th nationally, and against a Vandy defense that is 12th in the SEC and 69th nationally against the pass. I think that's where the game is going to be determined when LSU has the ball. So, key questions. When Vandy has the ball, can the offense win the battle of strengths against the LSU defense? And can Diego Pavia bring his all-around A game, especially against LSU's stern run D, as he must? I think the edge goes to Vandy here. Can Vandy's home crowd bring their A game and impact the flow and effectiveness of the LSU offense? I think so. Edge Vandy. Can LSU get in track in the running game, avoiding a bunch of third and long situations? I don't think they will. Edge Vandy. And finally, can Vandy hold Nussmeier and LSU's big play offense to field goals when they get to the red zone? I don't think they will. Edge Tigers. But I think enough of those edges go to Vanderbilt that they're going to win this game 27-21 and cover the 2.5 points. In our third pick in the Week 8 slate, we're going to South Bend, Indiana for another classic college football rivalry game. Last week, we got the Red River rivalry between Texas and Oklahoma. We got Michigan at USC. And this week, we get USC at Notre Dame, as well as Utah at BYU in the Holy War, which we'll talk about in a moment. But this is one of the most memorable rivalries in the history of the sport. Two of the most prestigious programs in the history of the sport. Brady Quinn, Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, Clay Matthews, the original Tush Push, the Bush Push. This rivalry has it all. The series sits in favor of Notre Dame 50-37-5, with the Irish taking not just the last 2 matchups, but 6 of the last 7 dating back to 2017. And each of the last 4 meetings has resulted in a double-digit margin of victory. Maybe that's one of the reasons why this number is so big. Spoiler alert. I think the spread is going in the wrong direction. I think we're due for a tight game in this rivalry. The line opened at Notre Dame minus 7.5. It moved up in 2 waves to 8.5 and then to 9.5. In some books, it's moved back down to 8.5, but there it currently sits. Now, 4-2 Notre Dame is on a roll. They've got 4 straight wins, home to Purdue, at Arkansas, home to Boise, home to NC State. Very decent teams. After starting 0-2, no less. And they easily covered the spread in 3 out of 4 of those wins. Meanwhile, 5-1 USC took care of business in their first 4 games, including their own 33-17 win at Purdue before falling at Illinois in a performance full of fits and starts. The Trojans bounced back in a big way last week at home against Michigan, racking up 489 yards of total offense en route to a 34-13 win and an easy cover of the 2.5-point spread. This is always a huge game for these two programs, but this year, given where each currently sits in the playoff landscape, it's also an opportunity to rack up their best win of the year so far. When we look at the USC offense against the Notre Dame defense, when the USC offense is humming, it's a beautiful thing to watch this year. And it could be hard for Notre Dame, even a good Notre Dame defense, to handle. Now, the same can be said for Notre Dame's hard-hitting front 7, even though some of their defensive trends are down a bit this year, especially against the pass. The USC offense is about as good as it gets statistically. They're 3rd nationally with 45.5 points per game. They're 16th nationally rushing the ball with Wayman Jordan, 226 yards per game. And they're 2nd nationally chucking it, 325 yards per game through the air. They're converting 3rd downs at a 55% rate, which is good for 4th nationally. And they're converting in the red zone at a 93.9% rate, which is 26th nationally. Now, Notre Dame's not bad. They are averaging 20.8 points per game allowed, which is 46th in the country. But that is almost 5.4 points per game higher than what they allowed in 2024 when they were 4th nationally in the country in scoring defense. In terms of rushing defense, they're doing much better. 25th nationally, it's what you'd expect from that front 7, 106 yards per game allowed. But in the secondary, not what you'd expect from a Notre Dame defense. They're 106th in the country, allowing 245 yards per game. This is the biggest area where they've stepped back in terms of defense. They were 4th nationally, allowing 169 yards per game a year ago. So they're averaging, almost 75 more yards per game allowed through the air. That's not great against a Jaden Maiava led USC offense. Now, from a turnover margin perspective, Notre Dame's in great shape. They're +6. They've got 12 takeaways on the year. That's 7th nationally. And on 3rd down, they're only allowing 36% conversion. That's 58th nationally, which is not bad. And in a red zone, they're allowing an 85% conversion rate. That's 77th nationally. That is kind of bad. So let's see what the Notre Dame defense can do against this USC offense, especially the USC passing offense, which, outside of that one loss to Illinois, has largely looked pretty darn good. Now, in terms of players to watch, you're going to watch USC's three-headed monster of Jaden Ava at quarterback, running back Wayman Jordan, and wide receiver Mekhi Lemon, who's second in the country with 682 yards. He's tied for seventh with 6 touchdowns. That's a crazy, crazy scary trio. On the Notre Dame defensive side of the ball, defensive tackle Boubacar Traore, who has one of the best names in football, is tied for 10th in the country with 5.5 sacks. If he can get pressure in the middle of that USC offensive line, Maiava may have to scramble more than he would like, and that may really put a pinch on the USC passing attack. And then that could help out defense back Christian Gray, who's tied for 11th in the country with 6 passes defense, and he's also got an interception. When Notre Dame has the ball, the Irish offense has been gaining steam week by week behind freshman quarterback CJ Carr. Meanwhile, USC's defense has had its ups and downs. The question is really whether Notre Dame can keep building on their momentum Saturday or whether USC can throw a wrench in the works. Notre Dame's offense is talented. There's no question. They're designed to run the ball with Jeremiah Love. They're designed to control the clock and limit possessions, which heavily complements their approach on defense. But make no mistake, this is a dynamic offense. They can throw the ball to every level. They can score. They're 14th nationally, averaging 40 points per game. They're 19th nationally with 292 passing yards per game. So if this turns into an air it out attack, both sides can do that. And they're 21st nationally on third downs, averaging 49% conversion when they get to third down, getting to a new set of sticks. So that's all pretty good information for the Notre Dame offense. USC's defense has been more bend but don't break this year. They're 50th in the country, allowing 21.3 points per game. They're 29th in rushing defense. So, Jeremiah Love's going to be up against it, and it does seem like Notre Dame's going to have to throw it. But if they do throw it, USC's defense is not great through the air, 103rd nationally, giving up 243 yards per game. This sets up to be a shootout where both quarterbacks get theirs, and maybe it comes down to turnover margin. USC has 11 takeaways of their own, so both of these teams are doing a good job defensively taking the ball away. That's tied for 29th nationally. And from a third down conversion perspective, they're in a very similar situation, just behind Notre Dame at 66th in the country, stopping opponents at a 37.5% rate. Now, they are much better in the red zone. They've only allowed opponents to score on 60% of visits. That's second nationally. So that's where Notre Dame is going to have to get the job done. Players to watch, I mentioned their quarterback, CJ Carr. He's got 1,600 yards. He's got 13 touchdowns and just 3 picks. Jeremiah Love is the engine of the offense. He's got 530 yards and 8 touchdowns. Shifty wide receiver Jordan Faison has 29 catches for 376 yards and 2 scores. And 6'7" senior tight end Eli Raridan has 20 catches for 342 yards. He can be a big threat over the middle, and he needs to be on Saturday. USC on defense is kind of at least in the front 7, it's a collective approach. 3 players have at least 3 sacks in the front 7, and that is backed up by safety Bishop Fitzgerald, senior transfer from North Carolina State, who leads the country with 5 interceptions. So key questions. Can Notre Dame's defense play more like the 2024 unit and slow down what will be the best offense and the best individual playmakers that Notre Dame has seen since Miami, if not all year? I think edge USC here. If Notre Dame can't step up and slow USC's ability to move the ball, can they generate enough takeaways and short field possessions to cover the nearly double-digit spread? Remember, they don't just have to win, they have to win by 9 or more. I would say edge Notre Dame. I think they're going to get their takeaways, but maybe it's a wash. Maybe USC does the same. Can Notre Dame develop a game plan to protect the ball while also successfully exploiting USC's shaky pass defense? Just enough to cover that 9.5, 8.5 spread. I think edge USC here. I know the pass defense isn't great, but they do get a lot of takeaways. I think that can be the great balancing factor in this game. And then, can USC capitalize on its strength defending the goal line and Notre Dame's inefficiency in the red zone and force the Irish to settle for field goals? I think they'll be able to do that on a couple occasions, and those are going to be really critical moments that ultimately swing the game. Should this be nearly a double-digit spread with the history, talent, and stakes on the field? I know 4 straight meetings have had a double-digit result. I don't think this one will. Give me Notre Dame 31-27 to win at home, but give me USC to cover the 8.5 points. In our 4th pick of the week, we are going to Provo, Utah for the Holy War. Just 50 miles separate Provo and Salt Lake City, but a whole lot of sports hate separates these two towns as well. BYU is a 3.5-point underdog at home to the Utah Utes. And Utah may be favored in this game, but it's in Provo. And the Utah faithful are going to need to make the pilgrimage en masse to offset what will certainly be a very hostile and very raucous BYU crowd. Now, 5-1 Utah leads the all-time series 52-30-4. At least according to their records, 6-0 and tied for first in the Big 12 BYU says that the record is 62-36-4. They're giving Utah 10 more wins and 6 more losses. Go figure. Anyways, Utah has controlled this rivalry over the course of the past 15 years, especially from 2010 to 2019, winning 9 straight. But BYU has risen up lately. They've won the last 2 matchups in 2021, and they won last year in a 22-21 nail-biter in Salt Lake City. Surely the Utes are coming to town hungry for a little revenge. Now, when BYU has the ball, their offense is also being led by a freshman quarterback, Bear Bachmeier, who, if it's not Boubacar Traore, Bear Bachmeier might have the best name in college football. Bachmeier is only completing 63% of his passes. You'd like to see that completion rate a little bit higher, but he is a freshman, and he's averaging a solid 8.5 yards per attempt. So he's getting the ball down the field, which is the biggest thing. You don't want a freshman to come in and be scared to stretch the field, take the top off the defense. Defenses will adjust to that, and that will ruin an offense. He is not being scared to throw the ball down the field, and that's led to 8 touchdowns and just 3 interceptions on the season. Now, he is supported by a great running back in LJ Martin. He has 652 yards on 6.5 yards per carry and 4 touchdowns on the season. He's also had a lot of help from big play wide receiver Chase Roberts, who has 420 yards, averaging a stellar 19.1 yards per catch, which has led to 3 touchdowns for Chase Roberts on the year. And across from Chase Roberts, we have wide receiver Parker Kingston, who has 23 grabs for 333 yards and 2 scores on 14.5 yards per catch in his own right. So 2 very good wide receivers on the boundary for BYU. That's a handful for any defense. But let's not forget about tight end Carson Ryan, who has 211 yards and 2 touchdowns of his own. That running game and those playmakers have generated more than enough offense to lead BYU to its current share of first in the Big 12, and it shows up in the numbers. Averaging 37.5 points per game, that's good enough for 3rd in the Big 12, 21st nationally. They're getting it done on the run, and that's what they do to set up the pass. They're averaging a stunning 238 yards per game on the ground, 2nd in the Big 12, 11th nationally. And on 3rd down, they're pretty good. 5th in the Big 12, 47th nationally, converting 42.8% of their 3rd downs. Could be a little bit better in the red zone, averaging 89.6% conversion to score in the red zone. 8th in the Big 12, 47th nationally. Pretty good numbers, pretty strong offense. But let's not forget, the Utah Utes are a program known for defense. Kyle Whittingham has built this program on defense. Offense has largely been Utah's Achilles heel, and we'll get to that in a moment. But unsurprisingly, the defense is once again a very solid group, especially through the air, and is the primary reason that Utah is still in the Big 12 race. They're only giving up 13.8 points per game. That's 2nd in the Big 12 and 11th nationally. They're giving up just 153 yards through the air, 2nd in the Big 12 and 11th nationally. And on 3rd down, they're 5th in the Big 12 and 33rd nationally, allowing opponents to convert just 32.9% of the time. Now, the Utes aren't stopping the run like they normally do. They're 9th in the Big 12 and 67th nationally, allowing 142 yards per game. For most schools, for most teams, those wouldn't be bad numbers. They're just not great for Utah. And when we think about the stinginess of the secondary, it makes sense that a lot of teams would double down on the run when going against the Utes. If Utah is going to win this game, much less cover, it's going to have to force BYU into a bunch of 3rd and medium or 3rd and long situations so their secondary can eat. If BYU's running game is able to keep the Cougars in 3rd and short situations, it could mean a lot of plays, long possessions, and trouble, frankly, for the Utah D. Now, we talked about the BYU quartet of Bear Bachmeier, LJ Martin, Chase Roberts, and Carson Ryan. But also, let's not forget about Utah's incredible defensive end, John Henry Daly, who's tied for 3rd nationally with 8 sacks, and their safety, Jackson Benet, who already has 3 picks on the year. Those guys could show up in a big way, and that could turn things when BYU has the ball. Now, when Utah has the ball, their offense has been a bit of an enigma this year up until the last couple of weeks when they have put some big numbers on the board. Quarterback Devin Dampier transferred into Salt Lake City from New Mexico in the offseason, and while his numbers aren't bad, he's at a career-best 71.5% completion rating. He has 1,131 yards, 11 TDs, and just 3 picks on the year. The same questions remain about what Utah offense is going to show up in any given week. Sure, the Utes put up over 500 yards, a balanced offense, in a 48-10 win over a crappy West Virginia team, and they logged 415 yards with 279 on the ground against a much better Arizona State team, but one last week that was without superstar quarterback Sam Leavitt. No, Sam Leavitt didn't play defense, but when Arizona State doesn't have their star quarterback managing the game on the offensive side of the ball, that leads to bad things on the defensive side of the ball, and it did. And sure, they put up 48 on what was a horrid UCLA team to start the year. I'm just not sure that offensively we've really seen that much from Arizona State. And while BYU is not just tied for first in the Big 12 with Texas Tech, so far they've looked like the number one contender to push the Raiders off pole position for the conference lead. Texas Tech absolutely stymied Utah 34-10 in a loss where Utah only generated 263 yards and turned the ball over 4 times. Given the blowout wins over UCLA, West Virginia, and ASU, it's not surprising that Utah's offensive numbers rank where they rank. And trend-wise, it looks pretty similar to what BYU's doing offensively. I'm just not sure it's an accurate lens for analyzing this matchup with the BYU defense, particularly in light of the road result at Tech. Now, when we look at the numbers all up, Utah's offense is second in the Big 12, 16th nationally, 39.5 points per game, but I can't get that 10-point outing against Tech out of my head. They're running the ball great. 248 yards per game, first in the Big 12, 8th nationally. They're throwing the ball well enough. 211 yards per game, 12th in the Big 12, 89th nationally. Those numbers have improved week over week. Third down, they're getting it done. 60% conversion. First in the Big 12, first nationally, and in the red zone, they're getting it done. 25 touchdowns on 28 trips. Second in the Big 12, 8th nationally, 96.5% conversion rate. So BYU's got to keep them out of the red zone, and when they get in the red zone, that's going to be a real hallmark of this game, is whether BYU is able to get those stops and force field goals. And their defense could do it. From a scoring perspective, they're allowing 14.7 points per game. That's third in the Big 12 and 12th nationally. Their run defense is great. Second in the Big 12, just 104 yards per game, 23rd nationally, and they are also really good through the air. 159.3 yards per game allowed passing, fourth in the Big 12, but just 11th nationally. So they may not be the top of the Big 12, but boy, that grades out well across the country. And then they've got 10 takeaways. So not only are they limiting opponents in terms of how they move the ball through the air, they're getting the ball and they're taking it and giving it to their offense. On third down, they're also forcing offenses off the field. They're second in the Big 12 and 12th nationally, allowing just 28.4% conversion. And then finally, red zone conversion. The BYU defense is 10th nationally and first in the conference, allowing opponents to score just 70% of the time. That's a very good defense. And on defense, Jack Kelly, linebacker for the BYU Cougars, has 4 sacks. Let's see if he pops this weekend. So the key questions to wrap this one up: which of these top 2 Big 12 rushing attacks is going to have the most success against the other's defense? I would say edge BYU at home. Can the Utah passing offense continue the success that they had last week against ASU, against BYU's so far stellar pass defense? I'm going to say again, edge BYU at home. When push comes to shove and Utah has to pass, which quarterback and receiving core are we going to see? Are they going to be able to keep the chains moving on third and medium and long? I'm going to say slight edge, BYU at home. If you can't tell, I think the home field advantage is huge in this matchup of two teams similar in so many ways. Can Utah quiet the crowd? I think not. Give me BYU 27-24, and that's a cover of the +3.5 that BYU is at the moment. Now, with our fifth and final top 5 pick of the week, we are staying in the Big 12 for a classic defensive battle between second-tier Big 12 contenders. Arizona at Houston. We're looking to be under the total of 46.5. This total actually opened at 47.5. It's already moved down a point. I got it at 46.5. I won't be surprised if it moves down to 45.5 by the time the week is out. 4-2 Arizona is on the road for just the second time this season after dropping a 39-14 decision to Iowa State in Ames in September. The Wildcats are coming off a tough double overtime loss at home to BYU, and now they get a 5-1 Houston team that got right in a lot of ways against Oklahoma State, but hasn't really put it together yet fully this season in every phase of the game. When we start with the Arizona offense and see how it shapes up against the Houston defense, quarterback Noah Fifita and the offense are really nothing special this year. Let's be honest. They can throw the ball a bit, but they can't run it much, and they struggle both on third down and in the red zone. Their scoring offense is 49th nationally, just 8th in the Big 12, 32 points per game. They're 11th in the Big 12, 79th nationally in rushing offense, 147 yards per game. And they are doing all right through the air, 275 yards per game. That's 29th nationally, 4th in the Big 12. Nothing to scoff at. On third down, though, 104th nationally, just converting 35% of the time. That's not great. That's a formula for a lot of disappointing possessions. And in the red zone, they have 13 touchdowns on 28 trips. That's terrible. 11th in the Big 12, 86th nationally. They've got to do better than that if they want to win. But we're looking at the under in this game. And so we're hoping that they don't. Houston's defense has been pretty balanced, and I think that they have a really good shot at making sure that Arizona's offense doesn't improve or beat those trends that they've developed over the course of the season thus far. The Cougar scoring defense is great. Just 17.5 points per game allowed, 4th in the Big 12, 23rd nationally. They're great through the air. So, strength on strength, 181.0 yards per game allowed. That's 29th nationally, 5th in the Big 12, and they've got 8 takeaways. They're great on third down, 6th in the Big 12, but 36th nationally, allowing just 34% conversion. So, that matched up with Arizona's inability to convert on third down is definitely a recipe for defense, and that's a recipe for punting, and that's a recipe for unders. And then finally, red zone conversion, just 88% of the time that they're converting, 12th in the Big 12, 92nd nationally. So, Houston's defense is not great in getting stops in the red zone, but hopefully they can at least get stops in terms of allowing field goals and not touchdowns. When we look at the Houston offense, we talked a lot about the Houston offense last week, so we're not going to beat it into the ground. They're just mediocre across the board. 66th nationally in scoring offense, 29 points per game. 66th in passing offense. 77th in rushing offense, 81st in third down conversion. They are 19th nationally in red zone. They've got 11 touchdowns on 19 trips, though. So they're getting a lot of field goals, but they are getting points. 94% of the time they're getting points. So against a Wildcat defense that's significantly improved versus 2024, that should make for tough sledding for the Houston offense. Arizona's defense is 27th nationally, just 18.5 points per game. They're only giving up 151 yards through the air. That's 10th nationally and 1st in the Big 12. They have 13 takeaways of their own, which is tied for 20th nationally. And they're only allowing opponents to convert on 30% of third downs, 18th nationally, 3rd in the Big 12. So they have similar problems. 53rd nationally, 9th in the Big 12, allowing 82% of the time an opponent to score in the red zone. So again, it's going to come down to, can these defenses stiffen up in the red zone against each other, or are they going to give up touchdowns, which could ruin our under? Key questions. Who gets on track between these two offenses against these two better defenses? I think edge defenses. Can Houston throw the ball on third and medium or long against Arizona's stellar pass and third down defense, and vice versa? Edge defense. Which of these defenses will stiffen up in the red zone and force field goals? Slight edge offenses? But come on, defense, you can do this. I'm going to take Arizona in this game, 23-17. I think that is the high watermark for the score. I would not be surprised if it's 2017, 17-13, something along those lines. Pretty confident that this one is going to go under the 46.5 total. Now, in others receiving votes, we have Duke -1.5 at Georgia Tech. This spread has moved a little bit in Georgia Tech's favor. Now it's squarely in the pick'em zone. I like Duke in this game. Duke isn't ranked. So Brent Key, his record for kicking the shit out of ranked teams does not apply here. The defense has been generating a bunch of turnovers for the Blue Devils. I don't see any reason why that's going to slow down. They've got to be feeling themselves right now. The offense is moving the ball effectively. I'm leaning Blue Devils to hand Georgia Tech their first loss and muck up that ACC race a bit. Next, we have Ole Miss and Georgia, and I'm taking under 54.5. This feels like an old school SEC rock fight. The total doesn't reflect what I think both teams are going to be coming in thinking in this game, and that is play great defense, establish the run, and not get beat by big plays. If that plays out as I expect, this is a 27-24 type game at the very most, which means we're leaning under on the 54.5. And then finally, we're leaning towards FSU minus 18.5 at Stanford. Is this a Mike Norvell save my job game? I mentioned that at the top. Surely if he loses at Stanford, he moves up to the top spot in next coach fired after his state mate, Billy Napier at Florida. But even in a win, it seems like Florida State needs to show Seminole fans, the Florida State administration, and voters around the country, frankly, that their win over Bama wasn't a total fluke. That means not just winning over an outclassed Stanford team, but winning big. If Stanford finds a way to keep this one competitive, we're climbing aboard the fade FSU train for the rest of the year. That is it for our picks in week 8. As always, may the betting gods be on your side. And last but not least, our playoff projections updated after another wild week in college football. It starts with number 1 Ohio State, still projected as the Big Ten champ, still the reigning defending champions. They are still kicking ass and covering spreads. While there are a lot of great teams behind them, there is no reason to move them out of the top spot this week. In the second seed, we've got Miami, still projected as the ACC champ. The bye week did not do the Hurricanes any favors, though, since they are followed by the Indiana Hoosiers, our first wild card seed. The Hoosiers chalked up, for my money, the best win of the year so far by waltzing into Autzen and dominating the Ducks in every phase of the game. I had half a mind to put them all the way to number 1, but my deep respect for the current Buckeye machine got the better of me. For this week, at least. In the 4 slot, I've got projected Big 12 champion, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Texas Tech keeps taking steps forward. Realistically, how high can they go? In the 5 spot, representing the SEC, I've got Alabama. Ole Miss, woof. That was a bad performance, even in a win against WSU. I can't have you projected as the SEC champion anymore, and the race is a muddled mess, so give me Bama. Talent, tradition, track record, and even Kalen DeBoer is no stranger to the playoff. Right behind Bama in the 6th slot, our second wild card, I've got Georgia, who will have a major argument to move up with a win over Ole Miss this weekend. And then in the 7th slot, I've got the Oregon Ducks, our third wild card. Now, the Ducks need to get right on offense, and that means finding a more consistent ground game so the passing attack can open back up a bit. The Ducks no longer have a marquee win thanks to Penn State, so they better win and win big the rest of the way. The voters are watching. Notre Dame is in the 8th slot as our fourth wild card. I think Notre Dame pulls it out against USC this week, and they keep moving up the ranks and in the minds of playoff voters. In the 9 slot, we've got our 5th wild card, Ole Miss. Look, it's simple. If Ole Miss wins this weekend, they move up. If they lose, considering how crowded the SEC race is, they likely move out. In the 10th slot, our first big bubble slot, I'm keeping Georgia Tech in the 6th wild card. Darian Mensah and Duke could play spoiler this week and knock Tech permanently off the bubble, though, with a win in Durham. In the 11th spot, in a surprise, I've got Vanderbilt as our 7th wild card. That's right, we've got the Commodores in the last wild card slot. They're going to have to beat LSU on Saturday to stay here. But if they do, they have a winnable, albeit not easy schedule the rest of the way. And then finally, rounding out our 12 seeds, we've got Memphis. Navy and UNLV are both undefeated alongside 6-0 Memphis, but the 22nd ranked Tigers continue to look like the best of the bunch. That's unlikely to change this weekend with what should be an easy win at UAB. That's our playoff projections for this week, and that is our Week 8 college football picks. Thanks again, everybody. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. Have a great week.